Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce. I'm Ahva Sadeghi, your host. And today we have a very exciting episode, one that I've actually been looking forward to quite some time. We have with us Celeste Warren, the Vice President of Global Diversity and Inclusion, Center of Excellence at Merck. She's changing the game and ensuring sustainability and diversity and equity inclusion across all of Merck's practices and truly in the healthcare space. You're a pioneer and you've been doing this work for over 2 decades. Celeste, can you please share a little bit more about your story and your impact and work with our listeners today?
Well, you are too kind. Thank you for the wonderful and warm introduction. As she said, my name is Celeste Warren. My pronouns are she, her, and I've been the vice president of our company's Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence this is my 10th year. And it has been a wonderful journey. I've been with Merck for over 25 years. And I started out in human resources as an HR business partner in our sales organization, sales and marketing, out in the field, and just moved all over the company in various different roles, supporting different parts of the organization, research, global support functions, U.S. market, global manufacturing division. And it's been quite a journey. I love the journey that I've been on. And when I first came to Merck, I came out of Kraft General Foods. And when I first came to Merck, I said, I'll try this pharmaceutical industry thing and then go to another industry like technology or something. And here I am, over 25 years later, still here, because every role that I went to, I learned a lot more. And if there's ever a story about me, it's about how I view my roles through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and try to do whatever it is that I'm doing, make sure that I'm doing it in a way where everyone can understand it and benefit from it. And understanding all of the different nuances from the people who are going to be the receivers of whatever it is that we are offering, from business strategies, people strategies. It doesn't make a difference, but we have to really think of it from an end user standpoint. And so that has followed me throughout my career. It's just something that I can't shake off no matter what job that I have. And so the last 10 years I've been in this role, and what a journey it has been. When I first got in the role, I remember having huge imposter syndrome. Like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I've told this story a couple of times, but I just think it just shows you the impact of the wonderful leaders that we've had. I was meeting with my boss, the then CHRO, Miriam Craddock-Weir at the time, and we were just having a regular one-on-one, and she called me to her office and said, "Hey, I know how you feel about this Chief Diversity and Inclusion role." And how I felt was, I'm very passionate about it. I'm very serious about it. It has encompassed who I am as a person, as an individual, and how I approach my work, and wherever I was in any part of the company. But I had this thing about, am I going to get the support? Am I going to be viewed as, oh, yeah, it makes sense, the Black woman's in DE&I. Okay, yeah, I get it. And it was so cliche. And it really wasn't something that I just saw myself doing for, company-wide. And first, we planned God Laughs. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing was, Miriam said, I know how you feel about this, but, Ken Frazier at the time was our CEO. We really want you to take this role. We think that you can really just take us to the next level. You're the exact person that we need to do this. And I thought, okay, here's my out, because, and she said, Ken really wants you to take this and he wants to talk to you about it. And I thought, there's my out, because he's a busy CEO. Mm-hmm. He's not going to have time to talk to me. By the time he's able to talk to me, it's going to be a couple months from now, and I'll found my way to weasel out of this. and I said, yeah, I know, I'd love to talk to Ken. That's no problem. And she said, good. So she grabs my hand, walks me out of her office, and walks me into Ken's office.
Oh my gosh.
We had this conversation, he and I, and he's so motivational, and he's been an inspiration to me for almost half of my career here at Merck, more than half. And so we had a very good conversation, a candid conversation. And needless to say, I walked out of there and it had accepted the job. So here I am, and he said, it was funny because he said, Celeste, great. I'm glad you're going to take the role. Come back to me. So this was in October, early October. And he said, come back to me in December with your strategy and let's move forward and really just make this happen. And so, and it's been that type of a journey. It's a learning, because there were some missteps in the beginning, as we have with any new roles that we go into, but you go into it from the standpoint of having a learning mindset and very much results oriented person. I believe in change methodology. That's how you drive any type of organizational change. And I had the air coverage of leaders who embrace diversity and inclusion, including Ken Frazier.
And I'm so happy and inspired by that story, because it really shows the commitment by leadership. And I think that's what we need for leaders in organizations that are driving change forward. We need a commitment across the entire organization, top down, bottom up. Everybody has to be aligned and have the resources. And it's really inspiring that this role and this conversation happened over a decade ago. And I know the research, we've been seeing the news about leaders in this role, and you defy the 10-year, a typical 10-year of a little over 2 years. And so what has enabled you to stay in this? You said you were really outcomes driven. So how did you create a plan and continuously reinforce that across the entire organization to show those results?
Well, I think the first 3 years, I would say 2 to 3 years in this role, I started with really doing a listening tour and a learning tour. So talking to those who were very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion at all levels of the organization, all areas, those that were the true ambassadors of DE&I. I talked to those that they embraced it, but they weren't necessarily active in embodying it and driving it forward. And then I talked to those that simply didn't buy into it. They just were, for whatever reason, just were not sort of, it's not that they were malicious or anything like that. It's just, it just wasn't top of mind to them. And so that in itself takes time to do. If you rush that, then you might miss very important gaps in your DE&I strategy to be able to do that. And so did that type of current state analysis is basically what we would call it in some change methodology language, and really looked at the organization to say, what were the pain points in the organization? Where do we see issues? And so when I say that I was learning my own learning journey, when I first approached it, it was very much focused on workforce representation, the number of employees that we had around the globe of different identities, and understanding what's behind either the lack of workforce representation in certain areas, and also the good things, like what's behind some of the bright spots around workforce representation at the various different levels and areas of the company. And that's where my focus was, I would say, the first couple of years. And then the evolution over the 10 years was, I would say the first year, that was probably my focus. And I made missteps in thinking a one-size-fits-all sort of strategy for a global organization that's in over 120 different countries. And the misstep was, how do we understand what DE&I means in XYZ country? What does that mean? What is the definition of a diverse person or an underrepresented category of people? And so my one size fits all, I went around to various different countries, traveled a lot that first year, because I was also in a hybrid role. So I was the head of HR for the manufacturing division, and I was the chief diversity officer.
Wow.
And so as I was traveling around, I would always carve out time to say, okay, now I want to talk to a certain group of employees and leaders around DE&I. And through that year, it was about a year of traveling to different countries. It was always, that diversity thing, that is a U.S. problem. It's not our problem. And so I would engage in conversations around social, political, economic situations in that particular country. And we would have these in-depth conversations, great dialogue. And then I'd squeeze in diverse, or just talk about diverse or diversity. And they'd say, well, and I'd say, well, what do you think that we've just been talking about? Diversity is differences in people, differences that are brought about by social, political, economic situations, by their lived experiences. And so you just talked to me about the different lived experiences of the people of your country and how that impacts you from a business perspective. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it clicked from that perspective. And so from that time moving forward, the focus was, how do we make this a global strategy that everyone can embrace and understand and make relevant in their country? So we had to have a global umbrella of, this is our DE&I strategy, but the framework is such that anyone across any country can grab hold of it and say, how do I make this relevant within my organization? And it doesn't take a consultant or a white paper. It's easy to understand because they understand the challenges they face in their country. So that was sort of part of the journey. The next part of the journey was, how do we make sure that we're integrating it into our business, into our drug discovery, development, supply, marketing, and sales, and all of the enabling functions? How do we make sure that DE&I is integrated into that? And that was, out of all of the pieces of the journey, that was sort of a challenging one, because people sort of thought, they didn't think from that perspective, even though you think we're a patient-based organization, we care about the patient, it's at the center of what we do. But back years ago, we kind of looked at the top of the distribution curve from a patient perspective. And it's not any different across many, many industries. Over the last few years, we've really started to look from a customer base, if you think any industry, looking at it, dissecting the demographics of the customer and understanding what are those obstacles or barriers that are getting in the way. And same from a patient base, dissecting the patient and understanding what are those things that are getting in the way. And so then we started leveraging the employee biz resource groups in a way where we focus them. You're going to focus on talent acquisition and development of your members. You're going to focus on business and insights and integration. How are you bridging the gap between our business strategies and patients in your respective community and in a corporate and social outreach? So putting all of that together to focus on really bridging the gap between our business strategies and our patients, and especially those patients in underserved, underdeveloped, undervalued communities across the globe. The work in health equity, the work in understanding the impact of those social determinants of health that get in the way. So then I guess about 3 or 4 years later, the next evolution of our strategy, which is where we are now, is to focus in 4 areas: our people, our culture, our business, and our world. And we, each year, since we launched that strategy back in 2018, 2019, it has been phenomenal to see the growth, because we've empowered different parts of the organization and different parts of the world to take that framework and say, what does that mean for you? Who are the underrepresented identities in your country from a people perspective? When we look at our culture survey, when you look at the information and you cut it by different demographics, how do those different identities of people view the culture versus those that are in the majority? And from a business perspective, how are you looking at your business through the lens of DE&I, and then making sure that all of your patients have access to all of our drugs and medicines? And then from an external standpoint and looking at our world, it's not enough that we're doing what we need to do within the 4 walls of our company, but we need to lift our heads up from the grindstone, look to the left, look to the right externally, and say, what is it that we need to be doing as an organization to be the community or the neighbor of choice in our respective communities? So they look at us as that neighbor that you want in the neighborhood, that you're doing things that contribute to the growth of the community. And, and so that was the fourth pillar. And I think it just really resonated with areas of the business and then also areas across the globe in different countries, because they were able to say, well, what do we need to be doing in the areas of people, culture, business, and world? And it really, really helped. And so, I just, this 10 years has been a journey, and the external world is changing so much, especially over the last 4 years. And we have to be ready for it. We have to understand that.
Absolutely. I feel like in your space, there's a commitment, right, to improving humanity and having such a intense grasp and impact on the world when you think of over 120 countries. That's really incredible. And some of the things you said made me think about when my graduate studies was in London. And I was one of 3 Americans in a graduate program. I studied economics and human rights. And the first lecture talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights and civil rights in the United States. And I grew up in Texas, and I learned about civil rights probably in a week in public school education. And we spent a whole semester learning about that and globally understanding what are the different challenges that countries face. And during my fellowship with late Congressman John Lewis, there was 30 fellows all from around the world. And everyone was required to create a social impact project that addressed civil rights in their respective countries. And that was so eye-opening for me, because I also assumed that the US was the only one that had this problem when I was very young. But when you say these stories, it really makes me think about how when I travel, when I have these conversations and dialogue, everybody can relate to it, but there is a different way of approaching it and communicating it and making them feel like they are part of that experience. And so that's where my startup mind goes into play when you focus on the end user, because ultimately it is a business case. Ultimately, we're trying to create more access, and what do we do to relieve those barriers? So I really find that so fascinating. I think a lot of our listeners can learn from that opportunity to communicate that way.
Absolutely, because you want to be able to reach everyone. And especially the last 4 or 5 years, actually it started longer than that, than Me Too. There was a propensity for not everybody to be under the umbrella of diversity, equity, inclusion. And a lot of the folks that, especially white males, were feeling excluded from it. And that's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do with inclusion and helping everyone to understand and be active allies and change makers to help us all drive forward. And being able to explain it in a way where everyone understands it, I think is very, very critical.
Yes. And I remember I read your article a while back that diversity inclusion strengthen everything that we do. And you have an impressive activity within all of your employee business resource groups. You have over 300 chapters and 21,000 members and allies across the world. Can you share a little bit more about your affinity programs? Because you were saying that how do we make allies feel like they can be a part of the conversation and not left out? Because they do have an important role.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have a very, very important role. So our employee business resource groups, and I'm so proud of all of them. We have 10 global EBRGs, and they focus, as I said earlier, in those 3 areas: talent acquisition and development, customer and business insights and integration, and then also social and corporate responsibility. And when we first started out, a majority of the chapters were all in the United States. To fast forward to today, a majority of our chapters are in each of the different regions. And it just, when we think of that global strategy that I talked about earlier, employee business resource groups are a great example of how we have expanded our DE&I strategy globally, because they have just grown from exponentially in the various different regions of the world in different countries. And being able to give them that empowerment to be able to do that and focus in those 3 areas. They have been able to partner with our global talent acquisition organization and our talent management organization and our learning and development organization to really say, okay, what can we bring to augment the programs and the learnings that we have within the company? What can we do to augment those for our members? And they have done some fabulous work in having leadership development programs and offerings to help to build them, talent discussions, and how do you have developmental discussions with your manager, and really helping them to be the author of their careers and the drivers of their careers, and really helping them from that perspective, whatever their aspirations may be. From a business standpoint, they have made such great impact on our business strategies, from vaccine confidence and understanding what are some of those barriers and obstacles that are getting in the way of people in their various communities, patients in their communities, not vaccinating. We've seen a decline in that across the especially the United States, and the decline in vaccinations, children and all the way through to adults. And why is that? And so they have focus groups with different EBRG leaders to say, what's going on? What's happening? What are those obstacles that are getting in the way? Our HIV franchise works with our LGBTQ plus EBRG to understand what are those gaps from that are getting in the way of those in that community being able to really experience the health outcomes that we want them to. And it's the same thing with our League of Employees of African Descent and our Alianza, which is the Latino and Hispanic EBRG, and our Asia Pacific Association, and our Native American and Global Indigenous people, from the standpoint of diabetes and prostate and different types of cancers, breast cancer, when we think about women. And we even have an interfaith employee business resource group, which really helped us from the standpoint of when we were having vaccine mandates and helping employees to understand what does it mean from the standpoint of if my faith prohibits me from being vaccinated, what does that mean? And really having engaging conversations from that perspective. And then also too, later with the war that's happening in Gaza and Israel, and bringing different communities together to have conversations around that. So they have just been instrumental from that perspective. Our capabilities, EBRG, has really got us focus on and help us to focus on mental health and awareness, which has just grown in its importance over the last few years around the globe. And so, those are just a few. Our Veterans of Leadership Network has helped us to bridge the gap, those that have served their country, and helping them to bridge the gap into corporate America, and sort of focusing on the skills and the capabilities that they have, and not just the fact that, you haven't worked in corporate America, but they've worked in an organization and developed skills while we're serving our countries in the various different countries that are applicable in our organization. So, they've just done a fabulous job in helping employees to feel valued about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's just been so impactful from every level of the organization and the work that they've been doing. And I am just so proud to see them grow. A third of our employees now are members of employee business resource groups. And the beautiful thing about it is anyone can join any employee business resource group, whether you are part of that identity or an ally. And that's how we're able to move the organization forward, because the allies take active roles in the employee business resource groups as well, in partnering with them and getting in the boat, grabbing an oar and rowing, and helping us to move the fleet of ships in the right direction.
That's so important. We need that type of energy and active support in order to move the needle forward. I'm so excited to hear about how you use these groups for the research part. I thought that was really profound and fascinating, because as a startup, we're constantly looking at how we communicate and how we segment. But when I think about medicine, I think about community, right? How did medicine begin? How did it evolve? And as a young kid, you really take what your parents have given you, and then you learn from friends, and then you learn from your aunts, your uncles, and that's ultimately how you start to view medicine. So I do think it's so important that you have those folks part of the conversation. We have someone on this podcast from Mattel talking about how they bring in different folks to design games, but it's just so powerful in every industry, especially medicine and science, and we think about health equity because it transcends any business or organization. This is about humanity and progressing us forward. When we first connected, Celeste, you had just come back from Davos, and I tuned in and listened to the incredible conversation and the panel that you had there. And I wanted to see if you could share some of your insights and the work that you're doing to advance women in science.
Oh, yes. That was my first time at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And I had a ball. I was working with the HBA and Mary Stutz, their CEO, and other colleagues to talk about advancing women, especially in healthcare, and some of the challenges that they face. And I talked a lot about within the organization, how are we leveraging women to help us from a business standpoint in driving the pharmaceutical industry and helping people be more healthy. We know that women in many families, they're the decision maker when it comes to the health and well-being of the family. They usually pick the doctors and the physicians and globally. And so the discussion that we had was how can make them feel a sense of belonging? What is it that they need to be doing? What is it that we need to be doing in order to drive that? And I talked a little bit about the culture within the organization and how do you make sure that it's a gender neutral culture so women can contribute more and more and more to our strategies, to our business strategies. And one of the ways that you do that is to make sure that you're taking away the various different cultural barriers that prevent them from feeling valued, feeling like a sense of belonging, and being able to contribute to our mission of saving and improving lives. And one of the ways that we do it is we have a survey that we do it twice a year. We call it a pulse survey, and to all of our employees globally. And when I get the information back from that survey, I cut the data from various different ways, different dimensions. And one of the things that we look at is from a gender perspective across the globe. How do women view our culture? And is it different from how men view our culture? And we're at a point now where the makeup, workforce representation of our organization, we're around 51% women, 49% men globally. So we know that we need to make sure that we're listening and understanding what's going on in the hearts and the minds of the women across the globe. And so when we look at the culture survey, we look at it, I want to see where there are gaps in the responses from a gender perspective. So I better understand it. It's those gaps. What does it say from the written comments, and then focus groups as well to understand and elaborate more. And we've been doing this now since I got in this job. And the first year that I got there were marketed differences in gaps in how women versus men view the organization and our culture, to where we are today, where the gaps are almost not there. And that's as a result of understanding, like I said, that current state analysis, understanding where the gaps are, where the pain points are, what women were saying were challenging in the workforce, and being able to put policies, programs, practices in place that help to close those gaps. During COVID, we know that the external research saying that women were feeling this even more. We did a survey of women in our organization around the globe and with our global benefits organization to understand what some of those pain points were, and immediately put things in place to help them to balance the time that they had to focus on their family. Kids are home from school. How are they educating them? How are they continuing the education? Making sure that they're fed, all the things that we take for granted. Do they have internet? How are, some of them, we saw some of the stories during the time of moms taking their kids to like Starbucks or places that have Wi-Fi so their children can learn. All of the inequities that we saw that women were dealing with. And we said, okay, what are you dealing with? And then put things in place quickly. Our global benefits group is phenomenal. Put strategies in place and interventions in place very quickly in 2020 to close those gaps. And so, I was just very, very proud to be part of an organization that was able to meet the needs. And so the female quotient, I have to shout out to Shelley and and Mary from HBA for bringing us together to have that very important discussion.
That's incredible. Was there anything that surprised you along the journey? Any surprising learnings going through that process? Surveys
I think the surprising learnings for me was so much that I didn't know across various different identities, and assuming that, well, because I'm a person of color, I'm a woman, that I understand everything there is to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was not, there was much more that I did not know. And being able to learn from different cultures and identities, I'm still learning from different cultures and identities. And I love that journey. I just absolutely love it.
Yes, what a profound opportunity and impact that you're having. I'm so inspired by your work. And Celeste, a question that we like to ask all of our leaders on this podcast is around open up the workforce, our mission at Symba, which for us, this means equitable access to jobs and wealth creation. So I'd love to get your perspective on what leaders around the world need to do in order to truly open up the workforce.
I think the best thing that leaders can do to truly open up the workforce is to open up the sphere of where you're sourcing candidates. A colleague of mine likes to say, you need to fish from different ponds. If you have the same recruiting strategy that you had 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that's not going to work in today's world. The labor market is much more diverse. It's much more in tune with what companies are doing, what their values are. And you need to make sure that you are sourcing from a lot of different sources, going to different career fairs that focus on various identities of people, developing relationships across different bodies, using the employee business resource groups as well. Really source candidates from all different types of backgrounds and identities to bring in to the organization. Think differently, think outside the box, do more than just thinking outside the box, but engaging with people of different identities to say, how can we do this better? And then how can we continue within the organization to have the culture that people want to be a part of and enjoy being a part of for the time that they're with us?
Thank you for that guidance. I couldn't agree more. When we think about opening up the workforce, we really believe it's creating access and building those pipelines early on. And we need more of that. It's like you said, where you're doing what you did 5 years ago, it's not going to fly. We want to stay ahead of the game. You got to think outside the box and engage. That's great advice for our listeners and for our leaders around the world. Celeste, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
No, I have enjoyed talking with you, Ahva. I love what I do. And I just want to urge all the leaders and the listeners to make sure that you are taking an active role in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout your organization, because all of us have a role to play.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your impact and work. We are such big fans and always rooting for you. We appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak with you today, Celeste.
Thank you for the invitation to be a part.
Wonderful.